Shalom and welcome back to the Rashi Nash. I'm Pastor Matt.
And I'm Kara.
Thank you all so much for your prayers as I have been going on my trip for the last month. It's wonderful to be back home and to be back doing the Rashi Nash with my wife. So thank you, honey, for being with us. We have a brand new book of the Torah this week. This is Sefer Devarim, the book of Deuteronomy. And the first Torah portion is called Devarim. Now, the word Devarim means words. Deuteronomy is the way that we say it in Latin. It comes over into the Greek as a word meaning second law, from the word nomos in Greek for law, second law. And the reason it's called second law in these languages is because it's a retelling of the laws and commandments that were given to the children of Israel as told by Moses. So this is kind of Moses's farewell speech. The book of Deuteronomy is like a sermon series that he gives over 30 days because he knows he's not going to be entering the promised land. And we'll talk a little bit about that during our time today. But as we get into this, I really only want to spend time on the very first verse of Deuteronomy, verse number 1 of chapter 1. And the reason I want to do this is there's so much for us to unpack at this verse that I just want to sort of park our boat here for a moment. Sometimes when things happen in our lives, we are reminded of them by the places that they happened. So if I were to say to you, the place of St. Augustine, which is a city about an hour north of us, our family has had lots of memories there in St. Augustine. If I were to say to you Paris, we had some memories in Paris. What Moses does is give a very long but gentle rebuke. This is the longest rebuke in all of the Torah. And he basically reminds the people of sins that they committed without specifically mentioning the sins. He mentions the places that they happened. And he's giving a gentle reminder, hey, listen, don't be like how we were at this place. Don't be like how you were at this place. And we'll get to that in a second. But this is the verse. These are the words which Moses spoke to all Israel on that side of the Jordan in the desert, in the plain opposite the Red Sea, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Hazeroth and Dizahav. Now, I'm going to get here in a second, but what's interesting is the only place in the entire Bible that these locations of Tophel and Lavan are mentioned is here. They're not specifically places, even though Lavan can be said to refer to the place of Lebanon. The word Lavan means white. And there was a time when it says that God showed Moses the Lebanon. And it doesn't mean the country of Lebanon. When he was up on the mountain, he shows him Lebanon. It means he showed him the Lavan, the place that is white. And it's referring to the Holy Temple, the temple that was white. Now, let's just look at the phrases that we have here in this one verse. First of all, these are the words. Rashi says, since these are words of rebuke, and he, Moses, enumerates here all the places where they angered the omnipresent, therefore it makes no explicit mention of the incidents in which they transgressed, but merely alludes to them by mentioning the names of the places out of respect for Israel. There are times when, let's say, we're with our children in public when they were smaller, and we might want to get their attention and to get them to stop a certain bad behavior that they are doing. We may want to get their attention that they are misbehaving and get them to start behaving without making a scene and without embarrassing them. This is kind of what is going on with the children of Israel here. Now, it also says, these are the words that Moses spoke to all Israel. Here's what Rashi says about this phrase. If he had only rebuked some of them, those who were in the marketplace, i.e. those that were absent, like if he only rebuked some of the people while others were busy doing other things, then they might have said, you heard from Moses, the son of Amram, and did not answer a single word regarding this and that. Had we been there, we would have answered him. Therefore, he assembled all of them and said to them, see, you are all here. If anyone has an answer, let him answer. It's almost like speak now or forever hold your peace. You know, if you have anything to say against the rebuke that I'm giving you, go ahead and speak up. But of course, no one has anything to say against the rebuke because it's true what he's saying. It also says in the desert. Now, here's what's interesting. We know from their travels in the Bible that they are within viewing distance of the promised land. They're actually in the plains of Moab right now, so they're not in the desert. So why does it say, these are the words which Moses spoke to all of Israel on that side of the Jordan in the desert? Because all of these places, in the desert, in the plain opposite the Red Sea, between Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Hazeroth and Dizahav, all these are locations where Israel sinned, where they really got it wrong. They really messed up. And he's trying to gently remind them of that. So at the time, they're not in the desert, but in the plains of Moab. So accordingly, what is the meaning of, in Hebrew, the word is Bamidbar, in the desert? What's the meaning? Well, it means that he rebuked them for having angered God in the desert by saying, if only we had died by the hand of God. If you remember, when the people came out of Egypt, they were really complaining about a lot of things, and some of the things they were complaining about were absolutely untrue. One of the things that they do is they say, oh, don't you remember these vegetables and these fruits and these things, the leeks and onions and the different things that we had in Egypt? Oh, we had it so good. It was so beautiful there. Well, we know for a fact, just by reading in the scripture, some of the things that they were remembering fondly didn't exist in Egypt. They were almost like remembering in a false way, like, oh, it was so good there. We had all these delicious things. No, you didn't. Just because you're struggling right now, you think the old days were the good old days, but they really weren't. You were slaves. They keep forgetting that. They keep wanting to long to go back to Egypt. Listen, sometimes the old days are just the old days.
Grass isn't always greener.
The grass isn't always greener. The leeks aren't always as tasty on the other side. So yeah, if only we had died. Because what they basically are saying is, weren't there enough graves in Egypt? Why did we have to come out here and die? But they weren't out there to die. God was going to take care of them. They just were complaining. Now, when it says in the plain, what it means is, in the plain he rebuked them regarding that plain, for they had sinned in the worship of Baal Peor at Shittim in the plains of Moab. So here they are in these plains of Moab where before they had sinned. And so he's giving them this reminder. Now, before we get to between Paran and Tophel and Lavan, because that's an interesting one, let's look at one more phrase, opposite the Red Sea. He rebuked them regarding their rebellion at the Red Sea. When they arrived at the Red Sea, they said, as I just mentioned, is it because there are no graves in Egypt that you've taken us to die in the desert? Likewise, they sinned when they traveled from the midst of the sea, as it is said, and they were rebellious by the sea, by the Red Sea. This is in Psalm 106:7, and also as found in Tractate Arachin 15a. Now, here's where we get to a very interesting thing. These places existed by the Red Sea, the plains of Moab, the desert, but he mentions two cities that aren't really cities. They're a reference to something, Tophel and Lavan. First of all, let me tell you the meaning of the word Tophel. It means whitewashed, something that is white, but it also means tasteless, something that is tasteless, but it also has a connotation of nonsense. Nonsense. And then Lavan, as I've already mentioned, means white, just as Tophel has a connotation of being white, but it also has a connotation of being tasteless. So what does this mean? Rabbi Yochanan said, this is Rashi quoting Rabbi Yochanan, we have reviewed the entire Bible and we found no place named Tophel or Lavan. However, the explanation is he rebuked them because of the foolish things they had said about the manna. He reminded them about this place called Tophel, which means foolishness. They were foolish about the manna. It also means white, as Lavan, and the manna was white. And it also means tasteless. They were acting like the manna was tasteless. Although the rabbis tell us the manna tasted like anything you wanted it to taste like. So how can you complain? How can you complain if a food that you eat every day could taste like something different? If you wanted it to taste like a hamburger one day and waffles the next, or whatever, it could taste like whatever you wanted. But you know what? When they complained, how many times is it true that when somebody complains against God, they say things that aren't really accurate? They exaggerate, or they say things that aren't true in complaining against God. So they claimed that the manna was tasteless. We want meat. We don't want this silly, miraculous food anymore. We want to complain and we want meat. So he says these cities that aren't really cities, aren't really locations, of Tophel, foolishness, tasteless, and white, and Lavan, which also means white, because they treated the manna with foolishness. They said foolish things about it. They said, and our soul loathes this bread, in Numbers 25 or 21:5. And because of what they had done in the desert of Paran, it talks about the location of Paran. This is a real location, and that refers to the spies at Paran, when it says that they gave a bad report. Now, in less than a week, we are going to mark a terrible day on the Jewish calendar called Tisha B'Av, or the 9th of Av, which is the anniversary of the bad report of the spies. It's a day that's been cursed in Jewish history. It's the day on which both of the temples, the first and second temples, were destroyed. And many other horrible things have happened on the 9th of Av. And when he mentions Paran, this is what he's referring to. He's saying, remember this bad report of the spies that you gave. Only 2 people out of the 12 stood up for what God said. And then also it says, and Hazeroth, this is concerning the insurrection of Korach, which took place at Hazeroth. Another explanation is, he said to them, you should have learned from what I did to Miriam at Hazeroth because of her slander. You remember what happened to Miriam? She got leprosy, talking against Moses' wife. Nevertheless, you spoke against the omnipresent. So, again, a gentle reminder. He's not being overly harsh with them, but he is reminding them about the failures. And the last thing he says is a place called Dizahav. Dizahav. So we remember at Passover, we sing a certain song about how it would be enough. And that song is called Dayenu. So the word die, when it says Dizahav, this is a form of the word die, meaning enough. And Zahav means gold. So when he says what you did at Dizahav, what he's saying is a place that I'm going to refer to as the place of enough gold. What does that mean? He's rebuking them for the calf that they made as a result of the abundance of gold. You had enough gold to make a big cow to worship out of gold. What a terrible thing. As it is said in Hosea 2:10, and I gave her much silver and gold, but they made it for Baal. This is also in Devarim Rabbah, and is quoted there by Eli Lieberman. So imagine this. Imagine you're being told of the things that you did that were not right. Imagine being reminded of the mistakes that you've made. Now, sometimes it's good for us to be reminded because these are teachable moments. These are learning experiences, and they're humbling. Sometimes it's good for us to have to be reminded of things that we've done in the past that weren't right so that we remember not to repeat those things. And maybe this is a lesson to us. You know, it could be a lot of fun to really remind someone of the horrible things they've done, the mistakes that they made, the sins that they've committed. It could actually bring us, in a twisted way, a form of enjoyment by saying, yeah, look at these bad things that you did. Sometimes we need to be reminded of our past so that we don't make the same mistakes, but that doesn't mean that we have to make someone wallow in guilt. It doesn't mean that we have to treat them rudely. there is a way that Moses gives us to remind someone. I think even especially our children, or those of you that have grandchildren, or if you're a teacher, your students, if you're a pastor or a rabbi, a congregational leader, it's good sometimes to be able to remind the people that are under you about the things that they have done, but in a kind way, in a way that they can remember what it is that they've done, but not to feel so guilty about it, not to, especially if they've repented for it, especially if they've been forgiven for it. It's good to have a teachable moment, but it's also good to remember the grace and the mercy that we all receive from God. So, a good lesson for us.
Yes.
Sometimes it's good for us to remind people, especially those under us, our children or grandchildren, our students, hey, listen, remember that time in such and such place? You don't have to go into all the details. They know what they did. So maybe a gentle reminder, maybe even, hey, remember what you did at that place where you used to live? You know?
Makes me think of that quote about history. Those who don't are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And I think there's some truth to that. So maybe a challenge to us this week. Have a teachable moment, but don't make people wallow in guilt. Don't let people beat themselves up for the things that they've done, especially for those things that they've repented for. But it's a good reminder. If you see someone going down a similar way that they did before, maybe it's good to remind them about the desert and the plain and the Red Sea and Paran and Tophel and Lavan and Hazeroth and Disahav.
Do it with love.
Do it with love. It's a beautiful coded message from Moses. So thank you once again for joining us this week. It's good to be back in the swing of doing the Rashi Nosh, and we do pray that this is a blessing to you. We've received many comments about how nice it is to have a husband and wife doing this as a team. And so always, I want to thank my wife Kara for doing this with me. I think it's important. It's good for us to be a good example of a godly couple in front of people, and especially our young people, that you can be like me and have a gray beard and still be in love with your wife. There you go. So thank you all very much for being with us. We wish you shalom, and we'll see you next week.